Aloha. My Bible is open to 1 Kings chapter 18, and we're continuing this little devotional series entitled the Elijah Chronicles. And it's hard to believe this is part number 6. It's unbelievable. So we've been looking at the life of Elijah, which I believe just really parallels so much of what's taking place in the context of our culture today, just sort of the craziness of what we're seeing in the world. So we've been learning all kinds of life lessons, practical life lessons from the life of Elijah. And last week, of course, our very last study, Elijah Chronicles number 5, was that fiery, explosive moment on the top of Mount Carmel, where Elijah, bless his heart, just simply kneels. He just simply kneels. And just in a few short sentences of a prayer, like this atomic burst from outer space, God, the fire just shoots and then just consumes absolutely everything. I mean, the sacrifice, the altar, the water, everything. And the people acknowledge the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Wow. I love to just visualize what that moment is like. But now so tumbling off the hills, we're just going to, in a few short verses, kind of just pick up and catch up with what's going on with Elijah. And so we're only going to just read a few verses for part number 6 here. I have just 2 short little applications, and then we'll just wrap things up for our little devotional on the Elijah Chronicles number 6. So this is 1 Kings chapter 18. I'm just going to read through these verses. Then we're going to back up, and I'll share the life practical applications. So we pick it up here in verse 41. So God promises, verse 41, hey, rain's going to come. Rain is going to come. So Ahab then went up to eat and drink. So this is the king. So keep in mind, 850 prophets of Baal and Asherah have they're done. They're over. They're history. And so here we have, God has sent this fire down from heaven. And the king, what does the king do? Hey, let's go eat lunch. That's exactly what he's doing. He's going into eating. So Ahab went up to eat and drink. Elijah now, so here's notice his contrast now. Elijah went to Carmel. He bowed down on his knees. He bowed down to the ground, put his face between his knees, and said to his servant, go up now and look to the sea. Now so I'm going to have to push the pause button here just a couple of times. So in the context of this, from our last study and this study, so when the fire came down, now the rain is going to come. So look, James Taylor is not the very first one to come up with the tagline, I've seen fire and I've seen rain. Long before JT was Elijah. I've seen fire, I've seen rain. God has promised, post the fire, that rain is coming. That's the promise of God. Yeah, it's right there in verse 41. It says, the sound of the abundance of rain. So that's coming from God. So now Ahab the king goes to eat lunch. That's Ahab. Elijah goes to pray. Drops down to his knees. Head down to the ground. Pouring his heart out. Just praying for this miracle of rain. So he says to the servant, go now and look to the sea. Now, I don't know if some of you have had a chance to go and visit the land where Jesus walked. The Bible stories, so we're talking about the Bible lands. So I've had a chance on 3 occasions. Once as a little boy, then once as a young pastor, and then a few years ago I took the pastors from Hawaii. I have stood on the top of Mount Carmel on at least 3 occasions. There is this massive statue of Elijah, this huge flowing beard. And it's one of the most majestic sights, really, to stand on top of Mount Carmel. And the reason why is it's because you just have this unobstructed view. It's gorgeous, really. So you can look out way into the distance and you can see the Mediterranean Sea. And then down below is the valley of Megiddo. So you can see this huge, beautiful valley that just stretches out. And then in the distance you see this Mediterranean Sea. And so that's exactly, this is what the servant is looking at. So Elijah's on his knees praying. God has already promised that rain is coming. It hasn't come yet. He's praying for this rain. He's praying for the fulfillment of this miracle and this promise. And he keeps saying to the servant, go take a look. Go take a peek. Are you seeing anything coming? And so, verse 43 said to the servant, go now, look into the sea. And so he went up and he looked and he said, there is nothing. 7 times. This is what it says here in verse 43. 7 times Elijah. He's praying. And so he'll pray and then say to the servant, go take a look. Comes back. No, don't see anything. Keeps praying. Go take another look. That happens 7 times. But Elijah keeps praying because he knows that God has made the promise and he's not going to give up. 7 times. He's done this now. And then it came to pass, verse 44, that the 7th time, the little servant comes back to Elijah. So he's run over, he's checked it out. From his vantage point on the top of Mount Carmel, he's peering out. And it's just been clear skies. Clear skies. And it just seems like you can see forever. But he comes back the 7th time. Notice what he says here in verse 44. And the servant, he's probably panting. And he's so excited. And he's just saying, there's a cloud. Master, there's a cloud as small as a man's hand rising up out of the sea. You can imagine how excited this little servant was. Because he knows this is exactly what Elijah is looking for. And he's just so excited to come back. He said, Master, I see a hand. I see a cloud. It's the size of a man's hand. Beautiful. So Elijah knows exactly what's going on now. And so Elijah says, he says to the servant, now I want you to go up, say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down now before the rain stops you. In other words, get in that chariot and you just put the pedal down and you hightail it off at the top of Mount Carmel, heading straight back to town and to the palace because the rain is coming. And so it happened, verse 45, in the meantime, that the sky became black with clouds and wind, and there was a heavy rain. I'm going to push the pause button here for just a moment. Because, look, the Bible doesn't just say that there was a rain, but the Bible is very specific in saying there was a heavy rain. Now, look, sometimes we'll use the term, it's raining like cats and dogs. So sometimes we'll use that term when there's just this downpour that's just drenched. Oh, yeah, it's raining like cats and dogs. Now, this heavy rain, you would describe this, it's raining like hippos and rhinos. We're not talking cats and dogs here. We're talking it's raining like hippos and rhinos. It's just a deluge, a gusher coming down from the heavens. So Ahab the king rode away and went to Jezreel. Then the hand of the Lord came upon Elijah, and he girded up his loins. So he took his outer robe, tucked it underneath his belt. And here's the reason why. He girded up his loins, and he ran ahead of the king, Ahab, and the chariots. He guided the chariots because the rain was so intense. He guided the chariot with Ahab, the king, in it, to the entrance of Jezreel. So this would be the palace. So I've stood on top of Mount Carmel, and our guide, so you just kind of relive the story, and I can remember our guide saying, so the question came up, so how far do you think Ahab ran to Jezreel? He said, so if you went back to biblical times and you research this out, which they have, it was probably somewhere between 18 and 20 miles. Think about this. And I'm going to emphasize this a little bit more in our study next time for our devotional. But here's Elijah. Literally, he doesn't have Nike running shoes. He's got his sandals. He's got this robe, and he pulls it up so he won't trip. That's the girding. So he pulls it up, so it's probably up around his knees, tucks it under his belt, and he starts running. Running. But more on that next week. I've seen fire and I've seen rain. This is the rain part that we're looking at here today. And there's 2 life lessons, 2 applications that I want your heart to consider here, just based on these few little verses that we've had a chance to read. And number 1 is pray persistently. Pray persistently. That's the lesson we're learning here from Elijah. Pray persistently. Isn't it interesting? You stop and think about this for just a moment. Both Ahab and Elijah represent members of the church. Ahab, he was an Israelite. He had Abraham's blood flowing through him, just like Elijah. But here's the two contrasts as to how these church members are living. So after this dramatic moment of fire where God reveals himself through the fire, consuming completely the sacrifice, if there was anyone who should have been on their knees praying, it should have been the king. But instead, the king goes and does lunch. He's eating, he's drinking, and Elijah goes, finds a quiet spot, drops to his knees in the presence of God, acknowledging on his knees. It's an acknowledgement of who the higher power is. It's Yahweh God. Drops on his knees, prostrate on the ground, and he prays and he prays and he prays. It reminds me of James chapter 5, the prayers of a fervent man or woman. The effective prayers of a fervent man or woman avails much. That's a description of Elijah. Somebody that immediately goes to God in prayer. Praying. Because, and here's part of the reason why. He obviously he was a man of prayer, but God had just promised, immediately tumbling off the heels of this fire, God says, hey, the rain's going to come. But there had been no sign of it. So what triggered it was Elijah starts praying. The prayers of an effective, fervent man and woman avails much. Pray persistently. Pray persistently for the promise that God has already made. Pray for the miracle. Pray for the manifestation of what God has already promised. See, the Bible is full of promises. You and I should be finding ourselves on our knees, acknowledging the higher power of God, acknowledging and say, God, here's this promise. You've made this promise. Pray effectively and fervently. That's what Elijah did. So there's two options. You can just say, well, I'm going to go eat lunch. That's not to say that it's not important to eat. That's not the point here. But after this dramatic moment of God revealing himself in the fire, how do you just go eat lunch? Prayer. Pray persistently. Pray persistently. The prayer of an effective, fervent man and woman avails much. That's exactly what happened here with Elijah. He just kept praying persistently because he knew that God had made the promise. And because God had made the promise, God's going to fulfill the promise. Rain is coming. And it came. And it rained. A heavy rain. That's number one. Pray persistently. Life lesson number 2 from this story is don't give up on the promise. Don't give up on the promise. So it's one thing to pray, but don't give up then. So I think far too often for us as Christians, so we'll pray, oh God, please fulfill this promise. I'm going to claim this promise. Then nothing happens almost immediately. And we say, well, forget that, obviously. That's God's not pulling through. He's not doing his part. Maybe this just isn't for me, or maybe I just misread it, or I didn't understand it. No, So look at this story once again. Elijah prays 7 times. He sends the servant out. Take a look. Comes back 1 time. No, it's not. There's nothing there. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Elijah keeps praying, and after the 7th time, he sends off this little servant. The servant comes back all excited. I see a cloud the size of a man's hand. Boom. Elijah knows what that is. And that's when he says, go tell the king, better get in his chariot, better get going, because a heavy rain is coming. God is fulfilling his promise. Don't give up on the promise. Don't give up. Keep claiming it. Isn't it interesting? Think about the number 7. Isn't it kind of interesting about the number 7? You remember the story of the children of Israel in Jericho, right? How on the 7th day, God told them to march around Jericho. How many times? 7. Why 7? Well, God said march around 7, so they did. And they must have been wondering as they walked around one time, couldn't God do the miracle after 1? Couldn't he do it after 2? Couldn't he do it after 5? But they went 7 times around, and on the 7th time, boom, the miracle came. God fulfilled the promise on the 7th time. Do you remember Naaman? I mean, he wasn't even, look, this guy worshiping foreign gods. Little servant girl goes, talks to the prophet. Yeah, just, look, all you got to do, so you got leprosy. Look, all you got to do, dip 7 times in the River Jordan. Just dip 7 times. Naaman says, what are you kidding? We've got cleaner rivers back where I'm from. Why should I dip into this dirty river here? And it's like, well, listen, this isn't a great thing to ask. Just do it. So he goes, he dips down. Can you imagine gurgling down, holds his breath, comes up, blowing bubbles down, 1, 2, 5, 6. Nothing's, he checks his arms. No, I still got the leprosy. Goes down, comes up the 7th time. Boom, the miracle, the blessing, God's promise. God said, Jay, 7 times. Well, if he'd only done it 5, he would have missed out on the miracle. He would have missed out on the blessing. He would have missed out on the promise. Hey, you'll be cleansed. You'll be healed. No leprosy. Isn't that something? The number 7. Listen, think about this for a moment. On which day of the week has God intentionally infused his special blessing? It's the 7th day. See, my friends, this is just a little reminder for you and for me is don't give up on the blessing. Don't give up on the promise. Don't give up on the miracle too soon. That happens way too often for us. God has his own timing. But a promise is a promise. Don't give up. It's just like the second coming. I mean, there is a day that's going to come where we're going to look up in the skies and there's going to be a cloud the size of a man's hand. This is not going to be rain, heavy rain coming. No, this is God's coming. This is his promise. Don't give up on that promise. Pray persistently. Don't give up on the promise. It's in God's timing. He knows far better than us anyways when the miracle should come, when the promise should come. He's far wiser. He understands far better the timing for your life and for mine. So listen, my friends, from a tiny little story, I've seen fire, I've seen rain. This tiny little story, 2 little applications, but they're powerful, aren't they? Pray persistently. Number 1, don't give up on the promise too soon. That's number 2. And finally, I just simply go back again to standing there on top of Mount Carmel. Isn't that something? Think about this for Mount Carmel, Mount Calvary. Jesus dies on Mount Calvary, the manifestation of God himself, pouring his life out for you and for me to make sure that the promise is true, that if we find ourselves at the foot of Calvary and we give our hearts and our lives to him, that his promise that someday when you see that little cloud the size of a man's hand, he's coming back, and he's coming back for his friends. Calvary, Carmel, look, my friends, it's all about Jesus and trusting him. It really is. It's all about trusting him. So what do you say? Let's make that commitment. From this tiny little story, tucked away in a very obscure little book called 1 Kings, is a story about a king long ago and far away, a story about a prophet long ago, far away, 2 people, church, but going 2 separate directions. Let's make sure we're the ones, every single day, on our knees, submitting to a higher power and authority, saying, God, I trust you, I believe in you, I have faith in you, your promises are for real, you choose, but I'm not going to give up. I'm going to pray persistently, and I'm not going to give up on the promises that you have given to me. Hallelujah. Be of courage, my friend. Elijah Chronicles, that's number 6. Number 7's coming sometime in the future. But let's stay faithful to God. Hallelujah. God bless you.